I want to ask you first off, at this point in 2014, do we need to just accept that nothing of significance is going to get done this year?
Well, I certainly hope not. That accepting that nothing will happen is unacceptable. That is to say, here we are at Pete Peterson's foundation, Our America, Our Future. We all have a responsibility to find common ground, to keep working to try to get something done. If you just abandon that, you put so much farther into the future any prospect for success. And we really do need success, and we have many areas of common ground that we can agree on.
Where would you rank improving the nation's fiscal health in the list of your party's priorities right now?
Well, for a very long time, it may be counterintuitive to some, but for a very long time, pay as you go has been our mantra. Go back to 1982, the Democratic Midterm Convention. Some of you were maybe not even born yet, but at that convention, George Miller of California put forth a resolution for pay as you go, so you're not increasing the deficit. It passed. We really took until the Clinton administration to implement it, and during those years, you know the record of 4 or 5 of the President Clinton's budgets were in surplus or in balance. So that was abandoned after President Bush became president, and we went back, and we were on a trajectory of reducing the national debt significantly. Then, of course, that was reversed. But some of the motivation for people on the progressive end of the spectrum was, let's just get rid of the debt so we can get rid of the debt service, because you get absolutely nothing for that. It amounts to a tremendous amount of money. It's no investment, you get no return, and it's an opportunity cost for our investments in education, scientific research, and the rest. And so moving toward reducing the deficit is a priority for all of us in a fair and balanced way.
When it comes to then, let's say, the tax extenders that just passed last week in the House, do you think that those should have been paid for?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, it was counter to even what Chairman Camp was putting forth in his tax proposal. And he has about $400 billion in changes in the tax code that Democrats could agree to. But counter to his own proposal, his leadership had him bring to the floor a bill that took us $156 billion in debt for these tax extenders. It didn't include anything on the renewables, wind, solar, no low-income tax credit, no child tax credit. Even if it had, we wanted them to be paid for. But the fact that they made permanent these tax extenders to that extent was a real, again, opportunity cost for what we should be doing that really does grow the economy, because growth is what reduces the deficit. Growth, fiscal responsibility, making the right choices. We need more revenue, we need to make cuts, we need to make the right investments. But to take $156 billion off the table, unpaid for, unscrutinized really, it was really a step in the wrong direction.
How would you have paid for them?
Well, a question of which ones were needed. In other words, put them all outside the door and let them justify their existence as to whether they contribute to the growth of our economy. Certainly, many of the extenders that apply to the low end, whether it's low-income tax credit, child tax credit, that's money that's spent immediately, injects demand into the economy, creates jobs. Wind and solar is creating so many jobs in our country, many more jobs than shall we say, the coal industry has in existence in our country right now. So how do you pay for it? How they pay for it is in their budget to take $135 billion out of food stamps. When it was $40 billion, the faith community across the board said it was immoral, it was indecent, it's un-American, we have to feed our children. $40 billion out of food stamps. We cut it back to $8 billion. We still got criticized for even agreeing to $8 billion, but that's what we could find common ground. So in their budget, they have $135 billion cut from food stamps, while they give $156 billion in unpaid for tax cuts. So again, you have to see what is the justification for it, how does it grow the economy, how does it create jobs, is it worth even doing? So it's not a question of paying for it, what is it in the first place? And some of them we would be in agreement on and others not, but why should we close the door on some where there's plenty of agreement, renewables, et cetera, as well. So again, we hope that we will come to the table, have comprehensive tax reform, fair, balanced, simplification, close up some of those loopholes, reduce the rates, both corporately and individually, but take away some of those special tax breaks. The tax expenditures are over $1 trillion in any given year. So over $1 trillion. Mr. Peterson says 1.3 trillion. Some say 1.1 trillion. That's less than all the income tax that is paid. Now some of them are very worthy, like the interest on your mortgage, but some of them are not justified, and we have to make that distinction. And I think we can, and I think in doing so, we can lower the corporate rate, which I think would be a good thing.
You have been integrally involved in every big negotiation that we've seen over the past few years. You've been in there with the president, with the other leaders, whether it was the fiscal cliff or before the government shutdown or the big deal. What, in your mind, has been the sticking point that has prevented these deals from either from happening at all or from being what they could be? Not so much to lay blame, but so that it can be done differently the next time.
Well, let me just say that every time we have sent our people to the table, we sent them with no instruction except to start with growth. What grows our economy? And I know the theme here is how the impact of our fiscal state is on economic growth. What grows the economy? Now let's make decisions about investments or cuts in relationship to what grows the economy and how do we pay for what we need to do. The major sticking point, to answer your question directly, has been the absolute obstruction of our Republican counterparts to any revenue piece. Now, we do think that it's important to invest in education. Nothing brings more money to the economy, to the treasury, than investments in education, early childhood, K through 12, higher ed, post-grad, lifetime learning. Nothing brings more money to it. We need a skilled workforce. You heard Cheryl talking about that. It is essential. I would have that compete with any other tax break or some other expenditures. Investments in education, investments in scientific research, investments in research and development. We are all for research and development, not the way it was done last week, but in a way that really produces results, creates jobs, reduce the deficit. I think reducing the deficit and creating jobs should be the standard that we subject almost any expenditure or revenue to. So if you're absolutely taking revenue off the table, you cannot make enough cuts to get to the deficit reduction that you want to make. The president was willing to go forward with a grand bargain. He asked Harry Reid and he asked me, then as Speaker, what would you do if we agreed to these without additional revenues? You know, there was some revenue, the assumption of the expiration of the Bush tax cuts. But what would you do if we didn't have any other revenue provisions? We said, just go for it. It's really important for us to have a deficit reduction, even though it doesn't have everything we want. Of course, that's not the way it works. Just go for it. The president accepted it. Maybe the Republicans didn't think he would accept it, but when he accepted it, they walked away, and that was unfortunate. Because there are many things. When you have a grand bargain, you can include a lot of things in it that might otherwise be unacceptable in a small bargain. Well, why should we make all the sacrifice? But if there's a shared responsibility, you can really get a lot done. And I think that grand bargain would have, even though, as I say, many Democrats objected to certain provisions in it, but the big picture of it was definitely worth that decision.
What do you think would happen if you tried to do a grand bargain now? Do you think that you would have a different negotiation with John Boehner than you did back then?
Well, I don't know. It's the same. I just don't know. We've been to the table so many times with the principals, with the president then. That was almost 3 years ago now. Joe Biden, the Gang of Eight, the Gang of this, the Gang of that. And every time I send my members into the gang, I say, you know our values. You have no instruction, except we want growth. That's the centerpiece of the table. Now see what we can get done in that regard, because growth, of course, reduces the deficit too. There are other things, and I've mentioned this to the speaker a number of times, new wrinkle, well, I won't say wrinkles, it's bigger than a wrinkle, but the Congressional Budget Office has told us that if you pass comprehensive immigration reform, you can reduce the deficit by $900 billion, almost $1 trillion over the how we measure what the impact of a policy is. So that would, again, contribute to the reduction of the deficit. That's something that we weren't talking about 3 years ago.
So then is it worth doing parts of immigration reform? If there are some parts, like a pathway to citizenship, that are just too unpalatable to many Republicans in the House right now, would you be willing to do, say, the parts that really impact the deficit?
Well, it has to be comprehensive immigration reform. Now, the Senate bill is not a bill that I embrace lovingly. However, it's bipartisan. It passed the Senate. It's something that could become it could be signed into law very immediately. And I've urged the Speaker to take up that bill. No. Okay, so we have an alternative because he doesn't like the Senate bill. We have I think 3 co-sponsors or something like that, or Republicans, but nonetheless, it's bipartisan, and we're hoping to take it up. But it's hard to separate what reduces the deficit or not. They're talking about comprehensive. But to your direct point about citizenship, the Senate bill is effectively a legalization bill with a path to citizenship. It's long, arduous, and takes a good deal of time. In our House, I mean, what I'd like to see is a bill that does something similar to that. I don't think we as a country want to be a country that says, you can do our work, but you can't have the rights of a citizen in our country. It's more about who we are as a nation. Many of the immigrant community would love just to be relieved of deportation and crave the legalization. But as a country, I think we cannot prohibit a path to citizenship. How long it takes, how arduous it is, that's what the Senate has described. But it's in other words, the constant reinvigoration of America has been immigrants coming here. That's what makes us so dynamic as a country. And it's the commitment to improving the situation for a person's family. That's the American way, of responsibility to the next generation. So I always say every immigrant who comes with their hopes, dreams, aspirations, optimism, because we must be optimistic, makes America more American.
I want to ask you in the time we have left about the Affordable Care Act, because President Clinton was here a short time ago, and he suggested that Congress should create a permanent committee to fix any problems with the Affordable Care Act. He said no bill is perfect from the beginning. This one's got problems, and we need a committee that's constantly working on making it better.
Well, I will tell you this. I have all the respect in the world for President Clinton. He knows how hard it is to pass a health care bill, and I do think that the committees are in place to subject any legislation that passes. He's quite correct. No bill is perfect. None. There has never been a perfect bill. But the committees that are there have their oversight over it to subject it to the scrutiny. And I think that that that's a good enough place to be. I myself wanted single payer. I myself wanted public option. So again, I'd like to see it have some other look to it, but what is there is the compromise. Over 8 million people have signed up, over 15 million people by way of expansion of Medicaid and kids being on their parents' policies until 26 years old, and that's just the start. We're very proud of it. It is about innovation. It is about prevention. It's about quality, not quantity of procedures. It's about value of care, not volume of procedures again. So we're very excited about many of the positive aspects. We weren't thrilled about the technology and the rollout. So if he wants a committee on that, I think we've gotten over that by now. But let the policy have a chance to work. Let Congress always subject whatever legislation is to the scrutiny of oversight, effectiveness, and again, cost. That's where we started, with cost. And again, I want to thank Pete Peterson for his tremendous leadership. I also thank his family. I thank Michael for the generosity of the family, not only in Pete's generation, but other generations, but the focus on how important it is to have fiscal soundness and what the impact is on the growth of our economy. So I'm honored to be here today. Thank you, Nancy.
Very fitting and eloquent way to wrap this up. Thank you so much. Democratic Leader Nancy Pelosi.